Welcome back to Infidelity Tales Lab. We're incredibly grateful for your support. Before we begin today's tale, tell us, which city or country are you joining us from? We love connecting with our global audience. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Architect of Dreams. Sinclair Donovan's fingers traced over the blueprint of his latest architectural marvel, a sustainable community center that would revitalize the struggling neighborhood where he'd grown up. At 42, Sinclair had established himself as Portland's most innovative architect, known for designs that transformed communities rather than just creating monuments to wealth. Working late again, boss? Perry Gladwell, his project manager, leaned against the doorframe of Sinclair's office, just finalizing the community space. The council meeting's tomorrow. Sinclair ran his hand through his salt and pepper hair, a distinctive white streak at the temple, the result of a childhood accident that had nearly taken his life. Perry nodded toward the framed photo on Sinclair's desk. How's Valerie? Baby getting close now, right? Sinclair's face softened. 8 months. She's uncomfortable but excited. He picked up the frame, studying his wife's radiant smile. 5 years of marriage, and sometimes he still couldn't believe Valerie Donovan had chosen him. Their meeting had been pure chance. Sinclair presenting a redevelopment proposal for the hospital where Valerie worked as a pediatric nurse. She'd challenged his plan, pointing out flaws in the children's ward design that only someone who worked there daily would notice. Instead of dismissing her, he'd invited her to consult on the project. 3 months later, they had their first date. Valerie had fallen in love with Sinclair's vision, not just for buildings, but for people. Unlike the old-money Portland families that had rejected him, she saw past his roots in the city's deteriorating east side. She loved his determination to change neighborhoods rather than abandon them. You heading home soon? Perry asked. Just 1 more hour. Promised Val I'd be there for dinner. After Perry left, Sinclair's phone buzzed with a text from his childhood friend, Damon Riggs. Need to talk. Important. Call me. Damon had been warning him for weeks about something, but was frustratingly vague. Always dramatic, Sinclair thought, dismissing the message. They'd been friends since age 10, when Sinclair defended Damon from neighborhood bullies. Though their paths had diverged, Sinclair to architecture school on scholarship, Damon to a security firm specializing in digital surveillance. Their bond remained unbreakable. Sinclair packed up his materials and drove his modest electric sedan home. Unlike his competitors, who flaunted wealth with European sports cars, Sinclair believed success meant improving others' lives, not just his own. The community projects that had made his reputation rarely paid well, but they fulfilled his deeper purpose. He pulled into the driveway of their craftsman-style home, modest by architect standards, but perfect for the family they were building. Through the window, he could see Valerie moving around the kitchen, her pregnancy silhouette unmistakable. The sight still filled him with wonder. Inside, the aroma of Valerie's signature rosemary chicken greeted him. She turned, her auburn hair cascading over her shoulders, green eyes brightening at his arrival. You're actually on time, she teased, accepting his kiss. I promised, didn't I? He placed his hand on her rounded belly, feeling the baby kick. She's been active today. Valerie covered his hand with hers. Must know her daddy's home. During dinner, Valerie discussed the baby shower her friend Miriam Tate was organizing. Miriam was the wife of Brock Tate, a real estate developer who'd recently contracted Sinclair for a major downtown renovation. Miriam wants to hold it at Lucille. Can you believe it? Valerie mentioned the city's most exclusive restaurant. Seems excessive, Sinclair commented. Valerie shrugged. Miriam insists. Says Brock's covering it as a thank you for your work on the Westmont project. Speaking of Brock, he's bringing in a partner for the Riverside development. Someone with deeper pockets. We're meeting tomorrow. That's wonderful, Valerie said, but something in her expression flickered. So briefly Sinclair almost missed it. Later that night, as Valerie slept beside him, Sinclair's phone lit up with another text from Damon. Whatever Rutherford says tomorrow, don't sign anything. Trust me. Sinclair frowned. How did Damon know about his meeting with Bradford Rutherford, Brock's wealthy investor friend? Damon's security work gave him access to information most people couldn't obtain, but this seemed unusually specific. The next morning, Sinclair met Brock and Bradford at the downtown site. Bradford Rutherford was everything Sinclair disliked. Old money, smug superiority, and a reputation for acquiring properties in struggling neighborhoods, forcing residents out through legal loopholes, then developing luxury condos. Sinclair, your vision for this space is remarkable, Bradford said, extending his hand. His grip was too firm, his smile too practiced. But I believe we can elevate it further. Sinclair listened as Bradford outlined changes that would transform the mixed-income housing plan into exclusive apartments. The community spaces would become private amenities. We'll double your fee, of course, Bradford concluded, and guarantee more projects. All we need is your signature transferring creative control. Sinclair remembered Damon's warning. I'll need to review the contract with my lawyer. Bradford's smile tightened. Of course. Take your time. That evening, Sinclair finally called Damon, who answered immediately. Rutherford tried to buy you out, right? Damon asked without preamble. How did you know? Because that's his pattern. He identifies architects with integrity, buys their vision, then twists it. But there's more. Damon paused. It's about Valerie. What about her? Meet me tomorrow. Not at your office. The old boathouse at Evergreen Park. Noon. Before Sinclair could press further, Damon hung up. Something cold settled in Sinclair's stomach, a premonition of a storm gathering on his horizon, one that would soon break with devastating force. Chapter 2. Shadows of Betrayal. The next day, Sinclair arrived at Evergreen Park's abandoned boathouse, a remnant from his childhood when the park had been the center of neighborhood life. Now it stood forgotten, much like the community that had once thrived here before economic hardship scattered its residents. Damon was already inside, setting up what looked like surveillance equipment on a weather table. You've gone full conspiracy theorist, Sinclair remarked, trying to lighten the heaviness in the air. Damon didn't smile. Sit down, Claire. He only used that nickname when things were serious, a remnant from when Sinclair was too sophisticated a name for kids from their neighborhood. My security firm was hired 6 months ago by Westlake Investments to conduct background checks on potential business partners. Damon typed something on his laptop. Bradford Rutherford was one of them. During surveillance, we captured something unexpected. He turned the screen towards Sinclair. The video showed Bradford entering an upscale hotel. 20 minutes later, a woman arrived, her face partially obscured by large sunglasses despite the overcast day. Watch, Damon said quietly. As the woman reached the hotel entrance, she removed her sunglasses. Sinclair's world stopped. Valerie, his pregnant wife, was meeting Bradford Rutherford at a hotel. Alone. This could be innocent, Sinclair said, his voice hollow even to his own ears. I wish it was. Damon's eyes held genuine pain as he played more footage. Different days, different hotels, but always the same two people. In one clip, Bradford's hand rested possessively on the small of Valerie's back. In another, they kissed in the hotel elevator. How long? Sinclair asked, each word like glass in his throat. At least 5 months. Before her pregnancy showed. Damon hesitated. That's not all. More typing. In another video appeared, Valerie and Bradford in a doctor's office waiting room. The timestamp showed 3 months ago. Sinclair stood abruptly, knocking his chair backward. I've seen enough. You need to know everything, Damon insisted. Bradford's sudden interest in your projects isn't coincidence. They're planning something. What could they possibly? Think, Claire. Your reputation is built on integrity. Your contracts specify that your designs can't be substantially altered without your approval. Your name gives their developments credibility with the city council and community organizations. Understanding dawned with sickening clarity. They need my signature to transfer creative control. Then they can do whatever they want with the properties. Damon nodded grimly. And there's the other matter. The baby, Sinclair whispered. I'm sorry. Damon looked away. The timing. Sinclair paced the rotting floorboards. He'd noticed subtle changes in Valerie over the past months. New clothes, unexplained absences, reduced physical affection. He'd attributed it all to her pregnancy. I need proof the baby isn't mine, Sinclair said finally, his voice strangely calm. I can help with that. But what will you do? Something cold crystallized in Sinclair's chest. Nothing. Yet. They're playing you, Claire, using your marriage to manipulate your business. Then I'll let them think it's working. Sinclair's mind was already calculating, shifting to a new kind of blueprint. I need time and more information. Over the next week, Sinclair maintained a flawless performance of ignorance. He reviewed Bradford's contract with apparent interest. He kissed Valerie goodbye each morning, pretending not to notice her lingering in the shower to text someone. He even agreed to the extravagant baby shower at Lucille. Meanwhile, he and Damon gathered evidence. Through his security connections, Damon provided recorded conversations between Bradford and Valerie discussing their plan, how they'd use Sinclair's reputation, then discard him once they controlled his designs. What about divorce? Bradford had asked in one recording. Too messy, Valerie replied. He'd fight for partial custody. Easier to keep him in the dark, at least until the Riverside project is complete. Besides, being married to Portland's most ethical architect has its advantages. The DNA test confirmed what Sinclair already knew. The child wasn't his. Medical records Damon somehow obtained showed Bradford had undergone vasectomy reversal surgery 8 months ago. Each revelation should have weakened Sinclair. Instead, they strengthened his resolve. The hurt calcified into something harder, colder, more dangerous. What are you planning? Damon asked, concern evident as he watched his friend's transformation. Justice, Sinclair replied. But first, I need to understand the full scope of their scheme. Through careful investigation, they discovered Bradford wasn't merely altering Sinclair's designs. He was using them as fronts for money laundering operations tied to offshore accounts. Brock Tate was involved too, along with several other prominent Portland business figures. They'd selected Sinclair precisely because his reputation was beyond reproach, providing perfect cover for their operation. 2 days before the baby shower, Sinclair made his first move. He contacted an old client, Judge Loretta Maxwell, whose courthouse Sinclair had renovated pro bono after budget cuts left it deteriorating. This is highly unusual, Judge Maxwell said after hearing his request. I understand, Sinclair replied. But given the evidence, I believe it's warranted. She studied the documents he'd provided. You realize once this is in motion, there's no stopping it. That's exactly what I'm counting on. As Sinclair left the courthouse, he received a text from Valerie, baby shower Sunday. Miriam says wear your blue suit. Love you. He stared at those last 2 words. Once, they had been his lifeline. Now, they were just another lie in a foundation built on deception. Love you too, he typed back, then added, looking forward to celebrating our little miracle. He wasn't lying. He was looking forward to Sunday, but for entirely different reasons than Valerie expected. Chapter 3. The Baby Shower. Lucille Restaurant occupied the top floor of Portland's tallest building, offering panoramic views of the city Sinclair had helped shape. As he and Valerie stepped off the elevator, a hostess led them toward the private dining room where Miriam had arranged the baby shower. There they are. Miriam Tate rushed forward, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her enthusiasm as manufactured as her friendships. She air-kissed Valerie, then Sinclair. Everyone's been waiting for the parents-to-be. The room was filled with Portland's elite, developers, city officials, and socialites who'd shown little interest in Sinclair until his reputation made him valuable. He recognized many faces from Bradford's money laundering operation, all smiling at him with perfect teeth and dead eyes. Bradford stood by the window, champagne in hand, watching Sinclair with barely concealed triumph. Beside him, Brock Tate laughed too loudly at something someone said. Sinclair, you're at the head table, Miriam directed, leading them through the crowd. As they approached, Sinclair noticed his assigned seat was positioned directly in front of a door-marked restroom. On the table before his place, sat an air freshener beside a small tent card reading warning, strong odor. Several guests tittered. Valerie blushed deeply, but said nothing. It's a special seat just for you, Miriam laughed, squeezing Valerie's arm conspiratorially. We thought since you'll be changing diapers soon, You should get used to the smell." The room erupted in laughter. Sinclair smiled tightly, noting those who laughed loudest, adding each to his mental ledger. "How thoughtful," he said, taking his seat with dignity. Throughout the elaborate meal, Sinclair maintained perfect composure despite the calculated humiliation. He made conversation, accepted congratulations, and pretended not to notice Valerie's occasional glances toward Bradford. Gifts were presented, extravagant, ostentatious items meant to impress rather than be useful. Bradford's was last, a silver rattle from Tiffany and Company that Valerie accepted with feigned surprise. "Now," Miriam announced as dessert was served, "we have a special tradition at Lucille baby showers. The father-to-be receives the bill." More laughter as a waiter placed a leather folder before Sinclair. He opened it, revealing an $18,000 bill, far beyond what even Lucille's exorbitant prices could justify. Valerie paled. "There must be a mistake." "No mistake," Bradford interjected smoothly. "It includes a special wine pairing menu and a private room rental." The room fell silent, watching for Sinclair's reaction. This was the moment they'd orchestrated, the public humiliation designed to destabilize him before Monday's contract signing. Sinclair took a slow sip of water, then smiled. "How generous of you, Bradford, to arrange such a lovely celebration." Bradford's smug expression faltered. "The bill is for you, Sinclair." "Is it? How odd." Sinclair removed an envelope from his jacket. "Because I have here a receipt showing the entire event was prepaid. By you." He slid the envelope across to Bradford, who opened it with evident confusion. His face drained of color as he read the contents. "There seems to be some confusion," Bradford managed, his voice strained. "Oh, I don't think so." Sinclair stood, addressing the room. "In fact, I'd like to thank Bradford for his extraordinary generosity, not just for this shower, but for everything he's given my family." Uneasy silence fell as Sinclair continued, voice pleasantly conversational. "Did you know Bradford and Valerie have known each other for quite some time? Their relationship has been productive." He placed his hand briefly on Valerie's shoulder. She flinched. "So productive, in fact, that Bradford is going to be a father." Gasps rippled through the room. Valerie's face went ashen. Bradford stood abruptly, chair scraping loudly. "That's enough, Donovan. You're making a scene." "Am I? I thought I was expressing gratitude." Sinclair maintained his calm demeanor. "For the baby shower. For the child. For showing me exactly who my friends are." His gaze swept the room, lingering on those who had laughed at his expense. He reached for his water glass, lifting it in a toast. "To new beginnings." Sinclair set down his glass and walked out, leaving stunned silence behind him. As the elevator doors closed, he received a text from Damon. "It's done. Phase 1 complete." The next morning, Sinclair's phone exploded with notifications. The Portland Business Journal's headline read, "Federal investigation targets Rutherford Development Group for fraud." Accompanying the article was a photo of Bradford being escorted from his office by FBI agents. A separate article detailed how multiple Rutherford properties had been frozen pending investigation, including the Riverside development and several other projects involving Sinclair's designs. Valerie hadn't come home after the shower. Her absence was explanation enough. Sinclair's doorbell rang at precisely noon. Judge Maxwell stood on his porch, accompanied by her clerk. "The paperwork you requested," she said, handing him a sealed envelope. "Given the circumstances and evidence provided, the court granted your emergency petition. All joint accounts and assets are frozen pending further hearings." "Thank you, Your Honor." "Don't thank me," she replied grimly. "This is just the beginning of a very messy process." After they left, Sinclair opened the envelope, confirming what he already knew. His marriage was effectively over, his assets protected, and a restraining order granted against Valerie, barring her from their home. His phone rang. "Damon. FBI's expanding the investigation," his friend reported. "They're looking at everyone connected to Rutherford's operation. Brocktate's already cooperating to save himself. The whole network's collapsing. And Valerie, staying at Bradford's penthouse. She's tried accessing your accounts, but they're already locked down." Sinclair nodded, though Damon couldn't see him. "They thought I was just a useful signature." a reputation to exploit. They underestimated you. Everyone does. Sinclair looked around the home he'd built for a family that would never exist. This is just the beginning. That evening, as media reports detailed more arrests in the widening fraud investigation, Sinclair sat at his drafting table, designing not a building, but a different kind of architecture, one that would dismantle the lives of those who had sought to destroy his. Chapter 4. The Counterstrike. 3 months after the baby's shower, Sinclair stood in Judge Maxwell's chambers as she reviewed his latest filing. "You understand the implications?" she asked, setting down the document. "Once I sign this, there's no reversing course." "I understand completely." Sinclair's voice carried a certainty that had been absent from his earlier life, a man no longer constrained by others' expectations. The judge sighed, then signed. "Petition granted. Ms. Donovan, or Ms. Ashcroft, as she now prefers, will have 72 hours to respond." Outside the courthouse, Damon waited in his black SUV. "How'd it go?" "Exactly as expected." Sinclair buckled his seatbelt. "Valerie and Bradford have until Friday to appear for questioning in the paternity hearing. They won't show. That's what I'm counting on." In the months since the baby shower revelation, Sinclair had transformed both physically and mentally. Gone was the idealistic architect who believed in second chances. In his place stood a man with clearer vision, who had trimmed away not just 20 pounds, but also every remaining sentiment that might weaken his resolve. Bradford's arrest had been just the beginning. The federal investigation had expanded to include money laundering, fraud, and tax evasion charges against 12 prominent Portland business figures, all connected to Rutherford's operation. Miriam and Brock Tate had turned state's evidence to protect themselves. Others scrambled for immunity deals. Valerie had avoided arrest, claiming ignorance of Bradford's financial crimes. She'd filed for divorce, demanding half of Sinclair's assets and business despite the prenuptial agreement. Meanwhile, Bradford had posted his exorbitant bail and, according to Damon's sources, was planning to flee the country. "They'll run," Damon said as they drove. "With the baby due any day, they won't risk a court-ordered paternity test." "I know." Sinclair studied the city passing by his window, neighborhoods he'd helped design, communities he'd tried to protect. That's when we moved to Phase 2. At Sinclair's newly rented apartment, a sparse, utilitarian space nothing like his former home, they reviewed their strategy. Judge Maxwell's paternity hearing order was designed not to determine the baby's father, which Sinclair already knew, but to trigger Valerie and Bradford's escape. "My contact at Portland International says Bradford booked a private jet for Friday morning," Damon reported. "Destination, Cayman Islands. Where his hidden accounts are," Sinclair nodded. "And where there's no extradition for financial crimes. But there is for kidnapping," Damon added, "which is what it becomes if Valerie takes the child out of the country while custody is contested." Sinclair's new cell phone rang, a number he didn't recognize. He answered on speaker. "Sinclair, please." Valerie's voice, tearful and desperate. "We need to talk. I believe our lawyers are handling all communication." "This isn't about lawyers. I'm due any day. The stress of this situation. The situation you created?" His tone remained neutral, almost gentle. "This wasn't about anger anymore. I made a mistake," she pleaded. "A terrible mistake. But this vendetta. Justice isn't vendetta, Valerie. It's consequence. Bradford's facing 20 years. Isn't that enough? Federal sentencing guidelines suggest 12 to 15 with good behavior, actually. But we both know he won't serve any of it once he reaches the Caymans." Silence. "Then, how did you know about Friday's flight?" "The same way I know about the offshore accounts. The fake passports. The villa purchased through 3 shell companies." Sinclair leaned forward. "The same way I know you never loved me." "That's not true," she whispered. "At the beginning was a calculation. I've seen the texts, Valerie, from before we even met. Bradford needed my reputation, my connections to the community board. You were his way in." Her breathing changed, the sound of someone realizing they'd severely underestimated their opponent. "What do you want?" she finally asked. "For you to make your choice," Sinclair replied. "Court on Friday, or the Caymans with Bradford. Either way, the consequences are set in motion. After hanging up, Damon looked at Sinclair with concern. You're forcing her to flee with him. I'm giving her a choice. She'll make the wrong one. Sinclair returned to studying the documents spread before them. Bradford will promise protection, wealth, a new identity. She'll believe him because the alternative is facing what she's done. And when they land in the Caymans? Sinclair's expression hardened. They won't. Friday morning arrived with a thunderstorm that delayed all flights at Portland International. Bradford's private jet, however, had received special clearance to depart, a final favor from a corrupt airport official who would be arrested later that day. Sinclair and Damon monitored the situation from Damon's security firm office, where multiple screens displayed airport surveillance feeds obtained through questionable means. There they are, Damon pointed as Bradford's black Bentley appeared at the private terminal. Bradford emerged first, frantically checking his surroundings. Then Valerie, visibly pregnant, clearly in distress. She's in labor, Sinclair observed dispassionately. Should we? No. Let them proceed. They watched as Bradford practically dragged Valerie toward the waiting jet, ignoring her obvious pain. A private Dr. Bradford had bribed would attend the birth mid-flight, according to Damon's sources. Countdown initiated, Damon reported, checking another monitor showing a secure channel to federal authorities. FBI strike team in position. The moment Bradford's jet lifted off, Sinclair made a call to a number few people possessed, the direct line to FBI Special Agent Zora Holt, who had been building the Rutherford case for years before Sinclair's evidence accelerated it. They're airborne, Sinclair reported. Tracking beacon confirms course to Grand Cayman. Acknowledged, Agent Holt replied. Cayman authorities have been notified of the fugitive status and the medical situation. They'll be met on landing. But that wasn't the full plan. As the jet reached international airspace, a previously filed flight plan amendment took effect, one requiring an emergency landing in Miami for a mechanical issue. Bradford's pilot, secretly cooperative with the FBI after discovering his employer had set him up as a fall guy in the financial scheme, had ensured the diversion would appear legitimate. Miami confirms they've landed. Agent Holt reported 2 hours later. Rutherford is in custody. Ms. Ashcroft has been transported to Jackson Memorial Hospital. And the child? Healthy baby girl, despite the circumstances. Born 20 minutes after landing. Sinclair closed his eyes briefly. Despite everything, hearing that the innocent child had arrived safely brought unexpected relief. What will happen to Valerie? Damon asked after Sinclair ended the call. She'll face charges for attempting to flee a federal investigation. Sinclair gathered his papers. But her cooperation will likely result in probation rather than prison time. And the baby? That depends on choices yet to be made. Later that evening, Sinclair received another call from Agent Holt. Rutherford's singing like a canary, implicating everyone to save himself. He's even given up information on operations we weren't aware of, including Valerie's role, especially hers. According to him, the entire relationship with you was her idea. She identified you as the perfect mark, respected, principled, and lonely enough to be flattered by her attention. Sinclair absorbed this without visible reaction, though something cold settled deeper in his chest. And she's confirming this? Denying everything. Claims she was manipulated, feared for her safety. The usual. After ending the call, Sinclair stared out at the Portland skyline, the city he'd tried to improve, where he'd been betrayed by those who saw his principles as weakness. What's the next phase? Damon asked quietly. Justice, Sinclair replied. But justice requires perfect timing. Chapter 5, The Long Game. 1 year later, Sinclair sat across from his attorney, Naomi Hargrove, reviewing documents for his upcoming testimony in Bradford Rutherford's federal trial. They're offering a deal, Naomi explained, sliding a confidential Justice Department proposal across the table. In exchange for your testimony focusing strictly on the financial crimes, they'll ensure certain personal aspects remain sealed. They're protecting Valerie, Sinclair observed, his tone revealing nothing. Not exactly. Naomi removed her glasses. They're protecting themselves. Several officials were compromised in Rutherford's scheme. The less public attention on who was involved, the better for everyone. Everyone except Justice. Naomi sighed. She'd represented Sinclair for 15 years, since he'd first started his firm. She'd never seen him like this. Cold, calculating, patient beyond reason. The architects of this conspiracy will face consequences, Sinclair continued. All of them. Some already have. Bradford's looking at 12 years minimum. Brock Tate got 5. The others received lesser sentences, but their reputations and careers are destroyed. And Valerie, the name carried no emotion when he spoke it. Probation, as you predicted. She played the victim convincingly. The young mother manipulated by a powerful man. Sinclair nodded. And the child? Emma. Naomi hesitated. That's what Valerie named her. She's 14 months old now. Something flickered across Sinclair's face. The first real emotion Naomi had seen from him in months. I want updates on her welfare. Discreetly. Sinclair. Naomi chose her next words carefully. You've won. Your reputation is intact. Your business is thriving. You've even received a settlement from Rutherford's seized assets. Maybe it's time to move forward. I am moving forward. Sinclair gathered his papers. There's just one loose end to address. That loose end was Dominic Parsons, Bradford's longtime attorney and the architect of many of the legal maneuvers that had allowed the fraud to continue for years. While others had been indicted, Parsons had slipped through the investigation by claiming attorney-client privilege. After leaving Naomi's office, Sinclair drove to a nondescript office building in the industrial district. Inside, Damon had expanded his security firm into a full-scale intelligence operation, with clients ranging from corporations to private individuals seeking information conventional means couldn't provide. Progress? Sinclair asked, entering Damon's private office. See for yourself. Damon activated a wall display showing surveillance photos of Parsons meeting with various figures, some recognizable as Portland business leaders, others more obscure. He's rebuilding Bradford's network, Sinclair observed. Trying to. Most are too scared after what happened to Rutherford, but a few are desperate enough. Damon pulled up financial records. Parsons has been moving money through a new series of shell companies. Different structure, same purpose. And our friend at the Justice Department? Special Agent Holt continues to be very interested in our findings. Damon smiled thinly. Though officially, of course, this conversation never happened. Sinclair had cultivated an unusual alliance with Agent Holt, feeding her information through anonymous channels that had allowed the FBI to expand their investigation beyond Portland. In return, she ensured Sinclair received updates about Valerie and Emma without revealing his interest. There's something else, Damon added, hesitation evident. Valerie's been seen meeting with Parsons multiple times. Sinclair's expression didn't change. Show me. The surveillance photos revealed Valerie entering Parsons' office, building on 3 separate occasions over the past month. In the most recent, she carried Emma, now walking but still clinging to her mother's hand. She's running out of money, Sinclair surmised. Probation means she can't leave the state. Can't access the offshore accounts Bradford set up. The settlement she received in our divorce is nearly gone. According to her credit reports, she's maxed out 3 cards. Missed last month's rent. The probation restrictions are strangling her financially. So she's turning to the only person who might help. Parsons, who can access Bradford's hidden resources. For a price, Damon added grimly. Parsons has always had an unsavory interest in Valerie. Sinclair stood abruptly. Keep monitoring the situation. I want to know immediately if Emma's welfare is at risk. Over the next month, Sinclair testified against Bradford in federal court. His testimony was precise, devastating, and focused entirely on financial matters as the Justice Department had requested. Bradford received the maximum sentence, 15 years with no possibility of parole until at least 12 were served. Throughout the trial, Sinclair never once looked at Valerie, who sat in the back row each day, increasingly desperate as her financial situation deteriorated. The media portrayed Sinclair as the wronged husband who had bravely exposed corruption. His architecture firm received more commissions than ever, including a major hospital renovation that would provide stable income for years. Then came the call Sinclair had been waiting for. She's made a deal with Parsons, Damon reported. He's offered her a condo in his building and a monthly stipend. In exchange for living arrangements, she and Emma move in this weekend. Sinclair's jaw tightened. She's selling herself to keep a roof over Emma's head. Essentially, though she's positioning it as a personal assistant role. That night, Sinclair made a decision. The next morning, he called Naomi with specific instructions regarding a trust fund he'd established months earlier. Then he contacted Agent Holt with a proposition that would finally close the case that had consumed them both. The trap was set 2 weeks later. Parsons, growing confident after escaping prosecution, hosted a private gathering at his penthouse for potential investors in his new venture. Essentially Bradford's old scheme with a new name. Valerie, now installed as his personal assistant, had been instructed to charm the guests. What neither knew was that among the attendees was an undercover FBI agent with a hidden recording device. By evening's end, Parsons had explicitly outlined the money laundering operation to potential investors, incriminating himself beyond any attorney-client privilege protection. The raid came at midnight. Agents swarmed Parsons' penthouse, arresting him and seizing documents that would eventually connect him to criminal enterprises in 6 states. Valerie, terrified, clutched Emma as agents searched the apartment. "Ms. Ashcroft," Agent Holt approached her. "We need to talk." In a separate room, with Emma napping on a sofa under an agent's watchful eye, Holt explained Valerie's situation. "Mr. Parsons will be charged with multiple federal crimes. This residence is now seized property. You have no legal right to remain here." Valerie's face crumpled. "Where am I supposed to go? I have a child. I'm aware." Holt's expression softened slightly. "That's why I've been authorized to offer you an option." The option was a cooperation agreement. Valerie would provide testimony against Parsons in exchange for relocated housing and a modified probation that would allow her to leave Oregon. She would receive no financial benefit beyond basic living expenses for herself and Emma. "There's one more condition," Holt added. "The court has concerns about Emma's well-being given your association with multiple criminal enterprises. She's my daughter, and her welfare is paramount. You'll retain custody, but with court supervision and mandatory parenting classes. Failure to comply means foster care for Emma while you serve out your probation in a residential facility." Valerie, broken and with no alternatives, signed the agreement. 3 days later, she and Emma were relocated to a modest apartment in Seattle, one owned through a shell company that, if traced, led not to the Justice Department, but to Sinclair. He had orchestrated her escape from Parsons, not for mercy, but to ensure Emma's safety and Valerie's continued cooperation against the remaining members of Bradford's network. "Is this revenge or rescue?" Damon asked when Sinclair explained the arrangement. "Both," Sinclair admitted. "She'll face consequences for her choices, but Emma deserves better than a mother in prison or a life with Parsons." "And the trust fund you established for Emma?" "She'll access it at 21, long after Valerie's influence has waned. Until then, they live modestly on what the court provides." It was justice, measured, calculated, and precisely executed. But as Sinclair returned to his empty home that night, he wondered if the cold satisfaction he felt was worth the person he had become. Chapter 6, Reckoning. 2.5 years after the baby shower that had shattered his life, Sinclair stood on the observation deck of Seattle Space Needle, watching the city lights shimmer below. He hadn't planned to be in Seattle. A last-minute consultation request from Hospital Board had brought him to the city where Valerie and Emma now lived. "Beautiful view," remarked Dr. Whitney Calloway, the hospital board chair who had hired Sinclair to redesign their pediatric wing. "Though I imagine Portland's skyline holds more meaning for you." "Every city has its own signature," Sinclair replied diplomatically. "Seattle's is particularly striking from this height." Dr. Calloway studied him with shrewd eyes. At 62, she'd built her reputation on perception, both medical and personal. "You know, when I first contacted your firm, several board members objected. Said your involvement in the Rutherford scandal would bring negative attention. And yet you persisted. I did my research, found that while you exposed a major corruption ring, you never sought the spotlight, never gave interviews about the personal aspects, focused only on the financial crimes." She sipped her wine. That showed integrity. Sinclair offered a tight smile. The architectural community values discretion, as does the medical one, which is why I haven't mentioned that Valerie Ashcroft works at our hospital. The glass in Sinclair's hand stilled momentarily, the only indication of his surprise. Pediatric nurse's aide, Dr. Calloway, continued. Started about 18 months ago. Keeps to herself, works hard. Her daughter attends our staff daycare. I wasn't aware, Sinclair said carefully. No? Interesting coincidence, then, you choosing our project among the dozens you're offered monthly. Sinclair met her gaze directly. Very interesting. After dinner, Sinclair returned to his hotel, mind racing. He hadn't actively sought information about Valerie in over a year, trusting the systems he'd put in place to alert him if Emma's welfare was ever compromised. The trust fund for Emma remained intact, growing steadily, while Valerie lived on her modest salary, exactly as he'd intended. His phone rang. Damon. You're being followed, his friend said without preamble. Since you landed in Seattle. 2 men, professionals. Bradford's people? Doubtful. He's still in federal custody with limited communication. My guess is Parsons. Dominic Parsons had received a 15-year sentence, but rumors suggested he maintained connections to his criminal network through corrupt prison officials. Why now? Sinclair wondered aloud. Maybe they finally traced the shell company that owns Valerie's apartment. But they figured out you established the trust fund for Emma. Either way, be careful. Sinclair ended the call, then moved to the window, scanning the street below. Nothing seemed out of place, but Damon's instincts were rarely wrong. The next morning, Sinclair arrived at Seattle General for his scheduled meeting with the hospital board. As he crossed the lobby, a familiar figure emerged from an elevator. Valerie, in pale blue scrubs, her hair shorter, but her walk unmistakable. She froze when she saw him, color draining from her face. For a moment, they stared at each other across the crowded space. Former husband and wife, architect and destroyer of each other's carefully constructed worlds. Sinclair nodded once, then continued toward the boardroom. He felt her eyes on him until the elevator doors closed. The meeting proceeded efficiently. Sinclair presented his preliminary designs for the pediatric wing renovation. Spaces optimized for healing, play areas that encourage development while accommodating medical equipment, parents' rooms designed for extended stays. These are remarkable, Dr. Calloway commented, examining the renderings. You've addressed issues we hadn't even articulated. Children's spaces require special consideration, Sinclair replied, as do the adults who care for them. After the presentation, Dr. Calloway asked Sinclair to walk with her through the existing pediatric wing. As they toured, she pointed out structural issues and workflow bottlenecks his design would resolve. And here's our daycare center, she noted as they passed a glass-walled room where several children played under supervision. Staff can visit during breaks. Creates better work-life balance. Sinclair's eyes scanned the room automatically and stopped on a small girl with auburn curls, building a tower of blocks. Emma. Though he'd never seen her in person, he recognized Bradford's determined expression in her features. As if sensing his gaze, the child looked up. For one disorienting moment, her eyes, green like Valerie's, seemed to look directly into his. Then she returned to her blocks, the brief connection broken. Beautiful children, Sinclair managed. You've created a wonderful environment here. That evening, alone in his hotel room, Sinclair received an unexpected text from an unknown number. We need to talk. Coffee shop across from the hospital. 8 a.m. tomorrow. V. He stared at the message, weighing options. Meeting Valerie hadn't been part of his plan, but plans, as he well knew, required adaptation. The coffee shop was nearly empty when Sinclair arrived the next morning. Valerie sat in a corner booth, hands wrapped around a mug, eyes darting nervously to the door. Thank you for coming, she said as he sat across from her. Up close, Sinclair could see the toll of the past years. Valerie looked older, thinner, with fine lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. Her clothes were simple, inexpensive, a stark contrast to the designer wardrobe she'd once maintained. Dr. Calloway mentioned you're redesigning the pediatric wing, she began. That's right. Is that why you're here? In Seattle? I'm here because the hospital board requested my firm's services. Valerie's eyes narrowed slightly. After all this time, you expect me to believe it's coincidence. Believe what you want. Sinclair's tone remained neutral. What did you want to discuss? She glanced around before leaning forward. We're being watched. Men I don't recognize have been following me for weeks. At first, I thought it was part of my probation, but she swallowed. Then I saw one of them speaking with a former colleague of Dominic's. Sinclair's expression didn't change, though this confirmed Damon's suspicions. Why would Parsons be interested in you now? He asked. Because he thinks I have access to something Bradford hid before his arrest. Money, information, I don't know exactly. But they won't leave us alone. Her hands trembled slightly. Emma's 3 now. She notices everything. Asks why we have to take different routes home each day. Have you contacted your probation officer? The FBI? And say what? That criminals who shouldn't know where I live are watching me? They'll assume I violated the terms of my relocation. Her voice broke slightly. They'll take Emma. The fear in her eyes was genuine, Sinclair noted. Not for herself, but for her daughter. Perhaps the only honest emotion she'd ever shown him. What do you want from me? He asked finally. Help us disappear. You did it once before. Set up the apartment, the job here. I know that was you, not the Justice Department. When he didn't deny it, she continued. You have resources, connections. Help us start over somewhere new. Somewhere safe. And in return, I'll tell you everything. About Bradford, about the parts of the scheme you never uncovered. Names you don't have. Sinclair considered her offer. You assume I care about pursuing the case further. I assume you care about finishing what you started. About justice. She met his eyes directly. And about Emma's safety, or you wouldn't have arranged all this in the first place. Before he could respond, his phone vibrated with a text from Damon. Confirmed Parsons' connection. 2 men outside the coffee shop now. Proceed with caution. Sinclair glanced toward the window, noting a sedan parked across the street with 2 occupants watching the coffee shop entrance. We can't leave together, he said quietly. Go to work as usual. Act normal. I'll contact you. Relief flooded Valerie's face. Thank you. I haven't agreed to anything yet. Sinclair stood, leaving money for both their coffees. But I will look into the situation. Back in his hotel, Sinclair briefed Damon on the conversation. She's using Emma to manipulate you, Damon warned. Again, possibly, but the threat appears genuine. So what's the play? Sinclair stared out the window at the Seattle skyline. Parsons believes Valerie has access to something valuable. Instead of helping them disappear, we use them as bait, Damon finished. Draw out Parsons' people and end this permanently. The plan came together quickly. Damon arrived in Seattle that evening with equipment and personnel from his security firm. Within 24 hours, they had identified Parsons' men and established surveillance of their own. Sinclair contacted Agent Holt, who was initially reluctant to get involved. The Rutherford case is closed, she reminded him. We got convictions. Parsons is serving his sentence. And yet his operation continues, now targeting a woman and child under federal protection. There was a long pause. I'll need more than your word. You'll have it. Within 48 hours. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Through channels that appear to come from Valerie, information was leaked suggesting she would be accessing a safety deposit box at a specific Seattle bank, one supposedly containing evidence Bradford had hidden as insurance. When Parsons' men took the bait and broke into the bank after hours, they found not evidence, but a federal task force waiting. The subsequent interrogation revealed the full extent of Parsons' continuing criminal enterprise, operated from prison through corrupt guards and external associates. 3 days later, Parsons was transferred to a maximum security facility with no outside contact privileges. His network, already weakened by earlier prosecutions, collapsed completely. Agent Holt personally delivered the news to Valerie at the safe house, where she and Emma had been temporarily relocated. Parsons will never threaten you again, she assured her. But we still need to discuss your future. Sinclair, who had remained in the background of the operation, now stepped forward. I have a proposal, he said, one that serves everyone's interests. Chapter 7. Reconstruction. 6 months later, Sinclair stood on the grounds of what would become the Evergreen Community Center, a multi-purpose development in Portland's East Side where he had grown up. The project combined affordable housing, medical facilities, educational spaces, and parks designed to revitalize the struggling neighborhood. The foundation work is right on schedule, reported Perry Gladwell, still Sinclair's loyal project manager after all these years. Good. We need to complete the medical wing by winter. This project represented everything Sinclair had originally envisioned for his career, architecture that served communities rather than exploiting them. The funding came partially from his own resources and partially from an unusual source. Assets seized from Bradford Rutherford's criminal enterprise, allocated through a Justice Department program for community restoration. As crews worked on the foundation, Sinclair reflected on the arrangement he'd negotiated with Agent Holt. In exchange for Valerie's comprehensive testimony against remaining members of Parsons' network, she had received a modified relocation package, one that brought her back to Portland under a new identity, with Sinclair as the architect of her new life. It wasn't forgiveness. It was calculated necessity. Valerie possessed information that helped dismantle the last remnants of the criminal organization. Emma deserved stability and safety, and Sinclair needed closure, not through revenge, but through reconstruction. Mr. Donovan, a site supervisor, approached. The concrete for the Daycare Center foundation is ready for inspection. The Daycare Center was Sinclair's most meticulously designed element of the complex, a space where working parents could leave their children in safety while they accessed the center's services or work nearby. It would include a scholarship program for children from single-parent households. Emma would be among its first enrollees. The arrangement was precisely defined. Valerie, now using the name Melissa Reed, worked as an administrator for the community center's medical clinic, her nursing background utilized in a role that kept her under Sinclair's indirect supervision. She lived in an apartment in the first completed residential building, paying fair market rent from her salary. Emma attended preschool nearby, with the daycare center as her after-school care once construction completed. Sinclair maintained professional distance, employer to employee, landlord to tenant, nothing more. The boundaries were clear, the relationship transactional. Valerie understood the terms: continued cooperation, absolute honesty, and dedication to Emma's well-being in exchange for security and stability. That evening, as Sinclair reviewed construction reports in his downtown office, Damon arrived with their weekly security update. Parsons made another appeal, Damon reported. Denied, of course. Bradford comes up for his first parole hearing next month, but with his disciplinary record, he has no chance. And locally? All quiet. Your Ms. Reed is keeping her head down, doing her job. No suspicious contacts. Sinclair nodded, satisfied. And Emma? Damon's expression softened slightly. Thriving, according to her preschool reports. She's apparently quite the little architect, builds the most elaborate block structures her teachers have ever seen. Something unexpected tightened in Sinclair's chest. He dismissed it quickly. Has there been any contact between them? Sinclair asked, meaning Valerie and Emma. Only as scheduled through the visitation program. Damon hesitated. She's following every rule to the letter, Claire. Has been for over a year now. Maybe she's actually changed. People don't change, Sinclair replied. They just adapt to circumstances. Yet later that week, observing from a distance as Valerie, Melissa now, patiently helped an elderly man navigate insurance paperwork at the clinic, Sinclair wondered if that was entirely true. She worked diligently, showing none of the entitlement or manipulation that had characterized their marriage. Her focus on Emma appeared genuine, her commitment to rebuilding their lives evident in every choice. Not that it mattered. The architecture of their new arrangement was designed for function, not forgiveness. The community center project progressed rapidly. Sinclair's reputation had recovered completely from the Rutherford scandal, with his firm now recognized nationally for innovation in urban renewal. Many of those who had laughed at his humiliation at the baby shower now sought his approval, unaware that he remembered every slight, every complicit smile. Some found their loan applications mysteriously denied. Others discovered their permit processes inexplicably delayed. A few received audits from regulatory agencies that had received anonymous tips. None could trace these misfortunes to Sinclair, whose public demeanor remained impeccably professional. Justice, in his view, didn't always require grand gestures. Sometimes it was delivered in small, precise doses over time. One autumn afternoon, as Sinclair inspected the nearly completed daycare center, he encountered Valerie unexpectedly. She stood in what would become the main playroom, measuring spaces for furniture delivery. "Mr. Donovan," she acknowledged him professionally. "The pediatrician from Seattle General accepted our offer. She'll be heading the clinic's children's services. Dr. Calloway mentioned she'd recommended someone." "That's good news." An awkward silence fell between them. Too much history for casual conversation, too many boundaries for anything deeper. "Emma asks about the construction every day," Valerie finally said. "She's excited about the playground equipment." Sinclair nodded, unsure how to respond to this glimpse of the child he'd never formally met, yet whose welfare had shaped so many of his decisions. "The equipment will be installed next week," he replied. "Weather permitting." Valerie hesitated, then spoke carefully. "Her birthday is that weekend. She'll be 4. If you wanted to see the playground being used for the first time." The invitation hung between them. Not a personal connection, but an acknowledgement of his role in creating this space, this opportunity. "I'll have the contractor arrange it," Sinclair said neutrally. A test run would be prudent before the official opening. That weekend, Sinclair stood at the edge of the newly installed playground, watching as Emma, the only child present, explored the equipment. She tested each element, assessing its function before moving to the next, her analytical approach remarkably similar to his own design process. Valerie remained at a respectful distance, allowing Emma independence while staying vigilant. She caught Sinclair's eye briefly, nodded in acknowledgement of the gift this moment represented, then returned her attention to her daughter. Emma approached the elaborate climbing structure Sinclair had specifically designed, a series of interconnected platforms and bridges that could be configured in multiple ways, encouraging both physical activity and problem-solving. She studied it carefully, then began to climb. When she reached the first platform, she turned and called out, "Watch me," to her mother. Then, surprisingly, she looked directly at Sinclair. "You watch too, okay?" Startled by being addressed, Sinclair nodded. "I'm watching." Satisfied, Emma navigated the entire structure, her small face serious with concentration until she reached the highest platform. "There!" She broke into a triumphant smile and waved. Something shifted in Sinclair then, a realization that the cold satisfaction of his perfectly executed revenge had never brought the same feeling as this simple moment. Witnessing a child's joy in a space he had created, knowing he had helped build safety rather than merely punish those who had taken his away. It wasn't forgiveness. Some betrayals ran too deep for that. But perhaps it was something equally powerful. The choice to create rather than destroy, to build new foundations rather than demolish old ones. As winter approached and the community center neared completion, Bradford Rutherford's parole hearing arrived. As expected, his request was denied. What wasn't expected was his reaction. A complete breakdown followed by a full confession implicating associates who had thus far escaped justice, including several prominent Portland business figures who had rebuilt their reputations. Agent Holt called Sinclair personally to deliver the news. He gave us everything, unprompted. Names, accounts, operations we didn't even know existed. Claimed he couldn't live with the guilt anymore. "Bradford Rutherford doesn't experience guilt," Sinclair replied. "What's his angle?" "That's what's interesting. There isn't one. His health is failing. Prison doctors give him maybe 2 years. He wants to set things right before the end." Sinclair absorbed this information silently. Bradford's confession would bring down the last of his former associates, those who had attended the baby shower, who had laughed at Sinclair's humiliation, who had believed themselves untouchable. Justice, it seemed, had its own timetable. The community center opened on the first day of spring, a symbolic choice representing renewal. As Sinclair cut the ribbon alongside city officials, he spotted Valerie in the crowd, Emma holding her hand. The child waved excitedly when she recognized him, pointing toward the playground visible beyond the main building. Later, during the reception, Valerie approached him carefully. "Congratulations," she said. "What you've built here, it's going to change lives." "That's the intention," Sinclair replied. "Emma asked if you designed her preschool, too. She thinks you build everything good in the world." A small, sad smile crossed Valerie's face. Children see things so clearly sometimes. Before Sinclair could respond, Emma darted over, her energy a stark contrast to the measured interactions of the adults. "Is the playground open now?" she asked Sinclair directly. "You said when the building was finished, the playground would be open every day." "Yes," he found himself answering. "It's open now." Her face lit up. "Can I show my friend?" I told her about the climbing thing that changes shapes. "Of course." As Emma rushed off to find her friend, Valerie's eyes followed her with a mixture of love and apprehension. "She's so trusting, so open. I worry about that sometimes." "She has reason to feel secure," Sinclair said. "That's as it should be. Because of you." Valerie met his eyes directly. "I know why you did all this. Not for me. I don't delude myself about that. But for her. For what she represents." "And what's that?" "The future. Possibilities untainted by our mistakes." She glanced toward where Emma now climbed the structure, showing her friend the route she'd discovered. "You could have destroyed us completely. Instead, you built this." She gestured toward the community center, the clinic where she worked, the daycare where Emma would spend afternoons, the apartments where they lived. A contained world, designed by the man they had wronged. "It wasn't mercy," Sinclair said quietly. "I know." Valerie's eyes held a clarity that had been absent during their marriage. "It was justice. Your kind of justice." As she walked away to supervise the children, Sinclair reflected on her words. His revenge had evolved into something more complex, a reconstruction that served his sense of order while creating genuine good. The betrayers had faced consequences. The innocent had been protected, and he had rebuilt himself in the process. Not the naive idealist he'd once been, nor the cold avenger he'd become, but something new, a man who understood both darkness and light and chose to build with both. Chapter 8: Settlements. 2 years after the community center's opening, Sinclair received the call he'd been anticipating. Bradford Rutherford had died in federal prison, not from the illness that had been slowly consuming him, but from an attack by another inmate with connections to the financial victims of Bradford's schemes. Apparently, Bradford had enemies even behind bars, Agent Holt reported. The official ruling is homicide, but no one's particularly motivated to find the perpetrator. Sinclair absorbed the news without visible reaction. Bradford's death represented the final dissolution of the corruption network that had nearly destroyed him. With Parsons isolated in maximum security and the other conspirators serving their sentences, the chapter was effectively closed. "There's something else," Holt continued. "Before he died, Bradford changed his will, left everything to his daughter. Emma," Sinclair said. "Yes, though after asset forfeitures and victim restitution, everything isn't much. Still, there's a property in Vermont that somehow escaped seizure, and some family heirlooms. Does Valerie know?" "Not yet. As Emma's guardian, she'll need to be informed. But given the circumstances, we thought you should know first." After ending the call, Sinclair stood at his office window, looking out at the community center complex that had revitalized the neighborhood. The daycare playground was visible from his vantage point, children climbing the structures he'd designed. Emma would be there now, 6 years old, in kindergarten, spending afternoons at the center while Valerie, still Melissa to the world, managed the medical clinic. The arrangement had functioned exactly as Sinclair had designed. Valerie maintained her role, her new identity, her focus on Emma's well-being. Sinclair oversaw the operation from a distance, their interactions remaining professionally cordial. Yet something had shifted in recent months. The rigid architecture of their arrangement had developed unexpected spaces, small moments of genuine connection. Emma waving to him during his site visits. Valerie providing thoughtful suggestions for the center's next phase of development. Professional respect evolving into something not quite friendship, but no longer purely transactional. Now Bradford's death and unexpected bequest threatened to disrupt the careful balance. That evening, Sinclair asked Valerie to meet him at his office after hours. She arrived promptly, expression guarded. "Is something wrong with the clinic budget?" she asked, assuming a professional reason for the meeting. "No, please sit." Sinclair indicated a chair across from his desk. "Bradford Rutherford died yesterday." Her face registered shock, then a complex mixture of emotions. Relief, confusion, grief she seemed surprised to feel. "Ow! Prison violence. The details aren't important." Sinclair paused. Before he died, he changed his will. He left his remaining assets to Emma. Valerie's hand went to her throat. "What does that mean for us?" "For our arrangement?" "Potentially nothing. The assets are minimal. A property in Vermont, some personal items. They'll be held in trust until Emma is of age." "Will this expose us? Our identities?" "No. The trust will be managed through intermediaries. Emma's connection to Bradford will remain confidential." Valerie nodded slowly, processing. "Thank you for telling me personally." As she stood to leave, Sinclair made a decision. "There's something else. The Vermont property. It's apparently a small lake house that belonged to Bradford's family for generations. Agent Holt mentioned it might be suitable as a vacation home. For us." Valerie looked confused. "The trust allows for Emma to benefit from the property before she comes of age. If you're interested, arrangements could be made for summer visits. It would be good for her to have those experiences." The offer surprised them both. A deviation from the rigid boundaries Sinclair had established, an acknowledgement that Emma deserved more than just security. She deserved joy, connection, memories. "That's very generous," Valerie said carefully. "It's not generosity. It's her inheritance. Still, thank you." She hesitated at the door. Would you consider joining us sometime? Emma asks about you. She thinks of you as the person who builds safe places." The request hung between them. Not quite an olive branch, not quite absolution, but an invitation to step beyond the architecture of retribution into something undefined. "Perhaps," Sinclair replied, non-committal yet not refusing. That summer, Valerie and Emma spent 2 weeks at the Vermont Lake House. Sinclair received occasional updates, photos of Emma fishing, swimming, exploring the woods. In one, she stood proudly beside a small structure she'd built from fallen branches, her expression serious as she pointed out its features. "My building," read the caption Valerie had added. "She says she's an architect like Mr. Donovan." Something tightened in Sinclair's chest at that, a feeling he couldn't name, didn't want to examine too closely. Meanwhile, Portland continued to change around him. Many of those who had been caught in Bradford and Parsons' downfall had served their sentences and returned, trying to rebuild their lives. Some succeeded. Others found doors mysteriously closed, opportunities unexpectedly withdrawn. Miriam Tate, who had orchestrated the humiliating baby shower, had divorced Brock during his prison term and attempted to launch an interior design business catering to Portland's elite. Despite her connections, she struggled to secure clients. Permits were denied, contracts fell through, referrals never materialized. Eventually, she was forced to leave Portland, her reputation and resources depleted. Sinclair never directly acted against her or the others who had participated in his humiliation. He didn't need to. The architecture of consequence he had designed functioned automatically now, systems in place that quietly, inexorably delivered justice without requiring his active involvement. As autumn approached, bringing Emma's return to school and the community center's second anniversary, Sinclair received an unexpected visitor at his office, Damon, who had recently expanded his security firm internationally. "You look good," Damon commented, studying his old friend. "Almost content." "The center is exceeding expectations," Sinclair replied. "Crime rates in the neighborhood are down 30%. Test scores at the local school are up." "I wasn't talking about the center." Damon's eyes were knowing. "You've changed." "Have I?" The old Sinclair would have ensured Bradford suffered until his final breath. Instead, You left him to face justice on its own terms. Sinclair shrugged. The outcome was the same. But the architect was different. Damon leaned forward. You've built something here that goes beyond revenge. You've created genuine good from what was meant to destroy you. Later that week, during a routine inspection of the daycare facility, Sinclair encountered Emma unexpectedly. She was alone in the reading corner, frustrated over a construction set that wouldn't balance properly. It keeps falling, she explained when she noticed him watching. Without thinking, Sinclair knelt beside her. May I? She nodded, handing him the pieces. With practiced hands, he demonstrated how to create a stable foundation. The base needs to be wider than the top, he explained. That's how buildings stay strong. Emma watched intently, then repeated the technique perfectly. Like this. Exactly like that. Her smile was sudden and bright. My mom says you build things that help people. That's what I want to do too. That's a good goal, Sinclair replied, something shifting in his chest at her earnestness. My mom also says we should thank people who help us, Emma continued. So thank you for our apartment and my school and this playground. Before Sinclair could respond, Emma had hugged him quickly, then returned to her construction, matters settled in her direct way. That evening, Sinclair sat alone in his apartment, contemplating the journey from that humiliating baby shower to this moment. He had orchestrated the perfect revenge. Bradford dead, Parsons imprisoned, Valerie dependent on the systems Sinclair controlled, the conspirators scattered and diminished. Yet his greatest satisfaction came not from their downfall, but from what he'd built in the aftermath. The community center thriving, Emma growing up secure and purposeful, even Valerie finding a path to genuine contribution. It wasn't forgiveness, some betrayals cut too deep for that. But perhaps it was something equally powerful, the choice to create legacy rather than nurse grievance, to build future rather than remain imprisoned by past. As winter approached, bringing the community center's holiday celebration, Sinclair made another decision. When Valerie extended the now yearly invitation to join them at the Vermont Lake House the following summer, he accepted. Emma will be thrilled, Valerie said, surprise evident in her voice. She has big plans for a tree house, has been drafting designs for months. I look forward to seeing them, Sinclair replied, surprised to realize he meant it. The architecture of his revenge had evolved into something his younger self could never have imagined, a complex structure containing both justice and possibility, accountability and growth. The betrayers had faced consequences. The innocent had been protected, and he had discovered that the most satisfying retribution wasn't destruction, but creation, building something meaningful from the ashes of betrayal. Chapter 9. Foundations. 5 years after the community center's opening, Sinclair stood at the edge of the Vermont lake, watching Emma navigate a kayak with confident strokes. At 11, she showed the focus and determination that had characterized her since childhood, now channeled into activities she loved. Architecture club at school, competitive swimming, and especially designing and building structures that continued to impress those around her. This was Sinclair's third summer visit to the lake house, each trip carefully scheduled to maintain boundaries while allowing him to fulfill the unexpected role he had assumed in Emma's life. Mentor, occasional advisor, the man who built safe places. Valerie approached, offering coffee. She's been out there for an hour. Nothing deters her once she sets a goal. Sinclair accepted the mug with a nod of thanks. They stood in comfortable silence, watching Emma turn the kayak in a perfect arc before heading back toward shore. Their relationship had evolved into something neither could have predicted. Not friendship exactly, but a partnership centered on Emma's well-being. The rigidity of those early years had gradually softened into something functional, even occasionally warm. Valerie had earned back incremental trust through consistent choices and genuine dedication to Emma. Sinclair had learned that controlling every aspect of their lives served neither justice nor healing. The community center expansion opens next month, Sinclair remarked. The educational wing will double our capacity for after-school programs. Emma's already planning to volunteer with the architecture program for younger children, Valerie replied. She's designed a curriculum teaching basic structural principles through building blocks. Pride colored her voice, not just in Emma's achievements, but in the life they had constructed from the wreckage of betrayal and revenge. Under Sinclair's distant but watchful guidance, Valerie had transformed herself. The manipulative social climber who had married him for advantage had become a capable administrator whose genuine concern for the clinic's patients had earned her the community's respect. It wasn't redemption exactly. Some choices could never be undone. But it was evolution, growth beyond what either of them had imagined possible in the aftermath of destruction. That evening, as they prepared dinner in the lake house kitchen, Emma spread her latest designs across the table. Complex drawings for a sustainable treehouse she planned to build on the property. It uses the natural support of the oak branches, she explained, pointing to her calculations. And these solar panels would power the LED lights. The weight distribution needs adjustment, Sinclair noted, indicating a section of her design. The main platform should extend further on this side to balance the structure. Emma nodded seriously, making notes. Like we did with the community center playground, when the climbing wall made it unstable. Exactly like that. As Emma reworked her calculations, Valerie caught Sinclair's eye over their daughter's bent head. The moment held a complexity neither acknowledged aloud. The shared recognition of Emma's inheritance from both biological father and chosen mentor. Nature and nurture, creating something neither could have shaped alone. Later, after Emma had gone to bed, Sinclair and Valerie sat on the dock, darkness settling over the lake. The silence between them was contemplative rather than tense. Two people who had traversed a complex journey from betrayal through vengeance to something approaching peace. Do you ever regret it? Valerie asked suddenly. The choice to rebuild rather than destroy completely? Sinclair considered the question. No, destruction would have been simpler. Rebuilding required more precision, more vision, better architecture. You could have ensured we had nothing. That I lost Emma, that we suffered completely. That was never the goal, Sinclair replied. Justice was the goal. Balance. Is that what we've achieved? Balance. The question hung between them, genuine, stripped of the manipulation that had characterized their marriage. In the years since Bradford's death and the community center's success, Valerie had gradually reclaimed honesty, directness, even occasional vulnerability. Whether from genuine change or simply the recognition that deception no longer served her, the result was the same: a woman Sinclair would never have married, but could respect from a careful distance. I believe so, he finally answered. The guilty faced consequences. Emma has security and opportunity. The community benefits from what we've built. And you? What does Sinclair Donovan have after all this time? The question caught him off guard. Not because it was intrusive, but because he rarely considered his own outcome in the equation. I have, he began, then paused, searching for the right architectural term for what he'd constructed. Foundation. Solid ground beneath whatever comes next. Valerie nodded, accepting this incomplete answer. Emma asks sometimes about her father, the real one. What do you tell her? Age-appropriate truths. That he made serious mistakes. That he's gone. That family is defined by love and presence, not just biology. She looked at Sinclair directly. She considers you family, you know, in her own way. Sinclair didn't respond immediately, the complex emotions this statement evoked requiring careful examination. She's an extraordinary child. Yes, and she has your values, your perspective, despite everything. Valerie smiled slightly. The architect's influence evident in the final design. The next morning, Sinclair helped Emma begin construction on her treehouse, teaching her techniques for ensuring structural integrity while allowing her to direct the project. Her confidence grew with each successful element, her natural talent flourishing under precise guidance. Mom says you're the best builder in Portland, Emma commented as they secured the main platform. That you could have designed fancy houses for rich people, but you chose to build things that help everyone instead. There are many ways to measure success in architecture, Sinclair replied. I prefer the ones that create lasting impact. Emma nodded seriously. That's what I want too, to build things that matter. Over the following week, the tree house took shape, a testament to Emma's vision and Sinclair's subtle guidance. On their final evening before returning to Portland, they sat together on its completed platform, watching the sunset over the lake. "Will you come back next summer?" Emma asked. "There's an addition I want to build, a zip line from here to the smaller oak tree. If your mother approves the design, I'll help you implement it," Sinclair promised. Emma's smile was Bradford's, the same determination, the same charisma, but tempered with something gentler, more genuinely connected. Nature and nurture, creating someone entirely new. Back in Portland, life resumed its established patterns. Sinclair oversaw the community center's continued expansion. Valerie managed the now-renowned clinic. Emma excelled in school, particularly in mathematics and design. The architecture of their interconnected lives functioned smoothly. Boundaries clear, expectations understood, mutual respect maintained. It wasn't a conventional family by any measure, but it was stable, purposeful, even occasionally joyful. One autumn afternoon, as Sinclair reviewed plans in his office, an unexpected visitor arrived. Naomi Hargrove, his longtime attorney, now semi-retired. "I had to deliver this personally," she explained, placing a sealed envelope on his desk. "The final settlement in the Rutherford estate." Sinclair raised an eyebrow. "I thought that was concluded years ago." A previously undisclosed asset was discovered during routine audit. A trust account Bradford established before his arrest, hidden through multiple offshore entities. For Emma, Naomi nodded. Apparently, despite everything, he did make provisions for his daughter. The account contains approximately $4 million to be held in trust until she turns 25. Does Valerie know? Not yet. As Emma's legal guardian, she'll need to be informed. But given your unique arrangement, I thought you should know first. After Naomi left, Sinclair contemplated this final piece of Bradford's legacy. The money represented both opportunity and potential disruption. Financial freedom for Emma's future, but also possible complications to the carefully balanced structure they had built. That evening, he invited Valerie to meet at the community center after hours. She arrived promptly, concern evident. "Is something wrong with the clinic funding?" she asked, echoing her question from years earlier when he'd informed her of Bradford's death. "No, please sit." Sinclair explained the trust account, watching her expression shift from surprise to wariness. "What does this mean for our arrangement?" she asked finally. "Potentially nothing. The funds remain in trust for 14 more years. Emma's day-to-day life needn't change." Valerie studied him, her gaze direct in the way it had become over years of rebuilt honesty. But decisions about her education, her future opportunities, may need reconsideration. For $1 million opened possibilities we hadn't planned for. Valerie repeated softly, noting his choice of pronoun. "You've become invested in her future." It wasn't a question, but Sinclair answered anyway. "She's extraordinary. Her potential deserves nurturing." Valerie nodded slowly. "What do you propose?" A revised arrangement. The Community Center Educational Fund could sponsor specialized architecture programs for exceptional students. Emma would qualify based on merit. No special treatment required. And after high school, the trust can support whatever path she chooses, whether that's college, professional training, or starting her own ventures. They discussed details, practical, logistical, centered on Emma's development rather than their complicated past. As the conversation concluded, Valerie asked the question Sinclair had anticipated. "Will you tell her about Bradford's provision? Eventually, when she's old enough to understand the complexities. And about us? The real story." Sinclair considered this question carefully. "That will be your decision when the time comes. I'll respect whatever you think best serves her well-being." As Valerie prepared to leave, she paused at the door. "You know, for years I wondered what form your final revenge would take. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for you to reveal everything, to take away what stability we'd built. That was never the plan. I realize that now. Your revenge wasn't destruction. It was reconstruction, on your terms, according to your design." She met his eyes directly. The architect's ultimate power. After she left, Sinclair stood at the window overlooking the community center complex, the medical clinic where Valerie worked, the educational facilities where Emma thrived, the residential buildings providing homes for hundreds. All created from the aftermath of betrayal, all flourishing under his careful guidance. The perfect revenge, he realized, hadn't been destroying those who betrayed him. It had been building something so undeniably valuable from the wreckage that even they were forced to recognize its worth, and their loss in no longer being part of his original vision. Bradford was gone. Parsons remained imprisoned. The others who had participated in Sinclair's humiliation had scattered, diminished, forgotten. Yet from their scheme had emerged something none of them could have created: a community transformed, a child thriving, a legacy that would outlast all memory of their betrayal. As winter approached, bringing another year to its close, Sinclair received an envelope from Emma, a hand-drawn card inviting him to her school's winter concert, where she would be playing cello. Inside, she had sketched a building, recognizably the community center, but with fantastical additions she had imagined. Gardens climbing skyward, bridges spanning between towers, spaces that defied conventional architecture while honoring its fundamental principles. "This is what I'm going to build someday," she had written beneath the drawing. "Thank you for showing me how foundations work." Sinclair placed the card on his desk, a smile touching his lips. The baby shower where he had been humiliated, where his seat had been positioned before a toilet with an air freshener warning of strong odor, where he had been presented with an $18,000 bill while his unfaithful wife laughed. That moment that had once defined his pain had faded to insignificance. In its place stood something entirely of his creation, not a building, but a life. Not revenge, but legacy. As he had told Emma while constructing her treehouse, the foundation determines everything that follows. And Sinclair Donovan had built his foundation not on the shifting sands of revenge, but on the solid ground of purpose, vision, and the quiet satisfaction of seeing his designs take form